We've got a really great panel here of different nonprofit leaders. We have Jewel Delegal, who's our interim executive director for Justice for My Sister, Piper Stage Nelson, who is the executive director at I Live Here, I Give Here, and Celia Cole, who's the chief executive officer of Feeding Texas. And we're also joined by Bonterra's chief fundraising officer, Kimberly O'Donnell, who will help guide the conversation. These are three wonderful organizations that we have represented who are doing really amazing work. So I'm going to thank you at the end, but I just am going to just thank you again at the beginning for being here. This is a super valuable conversation, a really timely discussion. And I know something that is, really top of mind for, as you can see, 300 folks in climbing here. So people are really excited to hear what you have to say. And again, I know this is like a weird time, right, that we're all kind of living in. And so just appreciate your willingness to come share and be a part of this conversation. So Kimberly, I'll let you kind of kick us off and bring us into our first section.
Hi, everyone. It is great to see you here today. We are really looking forward to having an open conversation about meeting the moment. There is so much that is happening right now in the world of fundraising and social impact. And we want to dive into that a bit around how to navigate this fundraising disruption, this funding disruption here in 2025, and some actionable things that you can walk away with. So as we do that, let's first do a quick poll. I'd love to level set and get a sense of who is here with us today. We want to see, do we have nonprofits in attendance? We have some corporate funders, community and private foundations, or other folks, board members. Well, board members would fall under the nonprofit side, but other individuals who are attending. So we're just going to give that a minute to bake and let everyone respond. And what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about what meet the moment really means. So what we saw in doing a survey of more than 2,600 nonprofit organizations and more than 100 funders were some really valuable insights on how organizations are functioning right now and what they're seeing on the ground. Let's look at the answers if we can, Amanda.
Yeah, so it looks like we've got a majority of folks are nonprofit organizations, and then a healthy handful of kind of an even mix of corporate foundations, community or private foundations, corporate funders, I should say, and then some folks falling in that other category.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. So we're going to dive into some of the data that we found in this survey that we conducted. First, we found that 52% of federally funded nonprofits are experiencing financial instability. That is over half of mission critical organizations right now are operating in a state of uncertainty every single day. Nearly half are cutting programs. Or staff, 44%, cutting programs or staff, 39%, which means fewer services, slower response times, and increased pressure on the remaining workforce. And meanwhile, while this is happening, demand is rising. 60% of civic organizations and 53% of health organizations report increased need. So nonprofits are asked to scale and do more while losing funding. And largely what we're seeing is that large organizations are not immune to this. 67% of nonprofits who have budgets of more than $25 million in revenue say that they are negatively impacted right now. So these are systems level actors in our sector who are now feeling the squeeze and are needing to reset after sizable losses. And on the funder side, only 38% say that they feel prepared to respond to these shifts. So that's a major gap between awareness and action, and one that we really need to close and dive into. So what we're seeing is a snapshot of a sector that is under stress, and the one that needs to act urgently to support things today, but also needs to focus on long-term strategy. So we really want to dive into what you can do today and tomorrow to be successful. And I wonder, those of you out there, are you shaking your head as you hear some of these stats? We have more. That was what the data showed us. Um, Oh, I was on the wrong slide. Can we go back to the last slide? I want to also just dive into some of the things that we were seeing. That's right. So what do some of those insights really tell us about how we're seeing the social good sector? What we're seeing is that funding cuts are really colliding with the rising demand. We've already talked about that. Programs and people are on the line. Nearly half of those organizations are cutting services and staff. And so when that happens, communities are going to feel it first. And it's not just the smaller organizations, right? We talked about those largest, most well-resourced nonprofits are being under pressure. Nearly 7 in 10 large organizations report negative impacts. And on the funder side, what they're seeing is that there's definitely awareness, but it isn't always the same as action. And so most funders haven't yet changed how they are giving, despite recognizing that there is a shift in the landscape. Instead, they are kind of in a bit of a holding pattern right now. I would call it a wait and see approach, but it's due to a couple of different factors. These are anecdotal insights that I've heard from individuals who are working very closely with mostly community foundations. So this is some community foundation insight. What we were hearing was that, and these are things that wouldn't necessarily be said publicly by individual foundations, but when we look at what's happening in the sector today, we could say, well, are these foundations well equipped to respond rapidly? Is it just that there's some issues with the processes? And the answer really is no. A lot of a lot of foundations and funders responded quite quickly with COVID in the past, 5 years ago. But what we're hearing is that these funders are hesitating a bit because this is a different type of problem. COVID was more of a short-term problem. This is a longer-term problem that is going to affect our funding needs for a long, for the foreseeable future. It's also something that some funders don't feel like that you can put a lot of immediate money towards and solve the problem. So they're trying to be very thoughtful in how they are prioritizing their initiatives and leaning into organizations that they can truly help make a difference and support. So, that's just sort of the things on the side that we're hearing happening. Another bit of feedback that I've heard as well is with some of these funders, particularly those who are focused on supporting equity, what they're seeing is a need to put aside some resources to cover legal fees in case they are targeted in the future. And so they're being very careful, modifying language on their websites, reviewing their grant language and everything to ensure that they are acting in compliance. And there is also a lot of discussion around nonprofit mergers and dissolution in some cases. And we're hearing that not just on the funder side, but also among the fundraising coaches that are working feet on the ground with many, literally hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits. So those are some anecdotal things that kind of also answer some of the things that we're seeing that the data is showing. Now we can go on to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about the data. And now if we pop to the other one, what this means for this social good sector. So obviously there's no overnight solution here, friends. And it's going to take collaboration across the sector and a whole lot of fortitude. But what we know about nonprofit organizations is that none of us are new to that, right? Like none of us who have worked in this space think that things can happen truly overnight. It really is going to take some very careful strategy and some true resilience and adaptability. So one of the things that we've seen, we've got 5 different recommendations here from our report. For nonprofits, diversify revenue streams, really reduce reliance on any one funding source, especially from government grants. And so this is going to create more stability, adaptability, and really kind of strengthen what you're doing. Now, we've always known this to be true. I can't tell you in my long career in this sector how many times I have encouraged organizations to diversify revenue streams, but now more than ever, it is critical. Strengthening recurring giving is essential. So, your monthly or sustaining donors really create a reliable revenue stream for your organization, and they can also be really helpful as you deepen your long term relationships with supporters. It helps you go beyond and really looking at the different groups that are supporting your organization. And so that's something to be thinking about as well. Leveraging technology. So, from automating the outreach that you're doing to really scaling and personalizing your donor journeys, tech is going to allow you and your teams, particularly lean teams, to do more with less. And now with AI, it can help move the needle. Personalization, being very proactive in your communications, and really diving into how your donors engage in a daily way with in society, right? Like they are consumers, they are used to very quick responses, right? Things feeling personal, having a view into the impact that your organization is making are what is moving the needle and making things much more impactful and visible for donors and supporters. The fourth thing is around advocating for public support. Fundraising alone is not going to fill any gaps, right? Like it's got to be more than that. And so nonprofits need to engage policymakers and communities to help keep essential programs alive. I also just will say personally that am a big supporter of our advocacy groups within the sector, like the National Council of Nonprofits and the Nonprofit Alliance. So please look into those organizations. They are doing an absolutely fantastic job of keeping us informed of what's happening on the Hill and ways that we can become involved to elevate our social good voice. And then lastly, attracting corporate partnerships. Really engage with your corporate partners. Please reach out to them. Ask them if they can make introduction to any partnering vendors that they work with. Reach out to your matched gift donors and see if they might help elevate your relationship within that organization, or if there are ways that you might be able to get some in-kind support as well as financial support. So, and also look for right fit corporate prospects out there. They really are wanting to help and support in big and small ways, and sometimes it just takes the ask and if not now, continued involvement and curiosity in working with them. Moving on to
Uh,
the next slide.
Kimberly, just going to jump in. Let's just quick time check here. I want to get into the conversation from our panel. So maybe we can do a quick overview of our top recommendations for funders and then jump right into the conversation.
Sure. So there are 5 recommendations for our funders who are watching and listening today. Streamlining grant making, really those lengthy applications and reporting cycles could slow things down. So please go back and audit what you're doing and see how you can streamline things for your applicants. Engage in trust-based philanthropy. We have a great example in our report from Ally Financial about how they are offering general operating support and multi-year grants. And that trust-based giving really removes barriers and respects the nonprofit's expertise. Acting with urgency, only 38% of funders feel prepared to respond. So now's the time to adapt strategies, invest in the infrastructure, really looking at the tech that's being used and the tools that are being used, and then coordinating across funders to align with other peers in your sector to reduce duplication, uncover funding opportunities, and scale impact. So that's a bit of our insights from our Meet the Moment report. We are going to share the report with you, don't worry. But we want to move over and introduce Jewel and have her share a little bit about her organization. And then we're just going to go into some questions and dive into this more. Jewel.
Hi, Kimberly. Hi, Amanda, and everyone. Thank you so much for just the invite and invitation to be here and really just to contribute to this important conversation. So my name is Jewel Delagal, and I am the Interim Executive Director for Justice for My Sister. the founder, Kimberly Bautista, really trusted me to be able to come on this panel and just share about where justice for my sister is in this moment and how we can specifically, what we're doing on our end. So just a little bit about Justice for My Sister. So we use storytelling and filmmaking to prevent gender-based violence and change narratives. Specifically, we really have three different buckets that we work with. We are involved in workforce development. That's really our main bread and butter. We are also into systems change as well as youth leadership. So specifically how Justice for My Sister came to be is in 2011, Kimberly Bautista, who is a documentary filmmaker, uh, basically created a film called Justice for My Sister. And it was about the femicide in Guatemala. And from there, she worked with different embassies. She worked really on a grassroots level and decided to create a nonprofit, and specifically using filmmaking as the way to connect the East Side community of Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, East Los Angeles, parts of South Los Angeles. Now we are in 5 different counties. We are actually even now virtual, using technology to reach more and more of our participants. Um, so specifically, I think how we are specifically really meeting this moment is really just being flexible. I think being, a creative organization, the staff, the team, everyone is very creative, and really it's about flexibility. And I think that, I just find that this report, it's very interesting because there are some of the things that we've actually had to do organically. And I think like just to be able to see it written out so clearly, it's like it makes so much sense of why we feel that we are able to meet the moment and that we will have the resilience to continue on. This is actually Justice for My Sister's 10-year anniversary. The reason why Kimberly is not here is because she's on a sabbatical. And so I'm here to really continue to ground the organization, but also find ways to help continue to build the organization. And my background comes from, I worked in youth leadership, arts administration for many years. And so I too have gone through, the COVID moment when we all had to diversify. And so this is, although it's challenging, it isn't new, as Kimberly said. And so I think the thing that I have really grounded myself in and the team in is in hope. One, hope we will get through this. We do have to be creative, but some of the things that we are doing specifically, um, the diversifying of revenue streams. I think the first thing that really is important, and I heavily rely on the team in the sense of just getting their input, feedback, those who are speaking directly to funders. And I think the first thing is the communication of speaking to the funders. Often, I think, specifically even for smaller organizations and grassroots organizations, we're so grateful just to get the funding. But often, we forget that the funders are people too and understand the climate and also can work with us as partners to figure out what can we do to use some flexibility for the funding, whether we were supposed to maybe spend a certain amount down by a certain time. And what we found is that when we open that conversation, it's actually served us more than we expected. There's way more flexibility. Um, Recurring giving and leveraging technology. So we definitely use, we really rely on Instagram and social media. We are constantly sharing with our community about what we're doing. And when we do it, we do ask. We do say, please help us. And so we definitely have the diversification of our federal grants, but we also have our community, and we continue to share with them what we're doing, but also ask them, can you please continue to contribute? Something else that we're doing is moving into social enterprise. We haven't, because we are a filmmaking organization, we are actually finding ways to have our participants actually start to fundraise for themselves for their own projects. So, for example, we have a new program where we are helping two directors share their stories. And so we are meeting part of the fundraising, but it's also giving them the opportunity to then start to find ways, and it's connected to our mission, but it also helps the organization. And something else that we're doing is really relying on corporate. I think being a part of the film and television industry, we are reaching out to studios. And it's very interesting because a lot of them have their own, foundations. And so, again, it's really finding these unique ways. Another thing that we're doing with our social enterprises, because we're actually investing in equipment that we will then be able to rent out to other filmmakers. And we do that through a rental house. And so, again, when we're not using that equipment, this will be a way to bring in a revenue stream, and continue just to sustain us. And it's actually, and not only does it sustain us, but it also is broadening our reach as far as getting our message and our mission out through different communities that would not necessarily be connected to the nonprofit world. Um, and then, as far as long-term strategy, I think again, we are investing in, staffing. I think, the infrastructure, just getting those recommendations from the funder, infrastructure is very important. I think investing in your team is very important in the sense of, being very clear about what is needed, not just in the moment, but for the future, so that when you are moving into, just really building a runway. And again, I think going back to just hope, and resilience, and really knowing that, that is what we're here to do. We're here to support our communities and to support, our participants. And so always keeping them in mind, always keeping the mission in mind, and then finding those ways to support the mission, but also make sure that you are maintaining the financial, stability. I mean, that's very, very important. Um, and then as far as, sorry, I just got a little distracted. I see questions, but I know that Kimberly's going to open it up, and then we're going to have.
Yep.
So, yeah, so that's pretty much who we are. That's who Justice for My Sister is. And the last thing that I would say is, of course, the importance of the board, being connected to the board, getting advice from them, and continuing to keep them engaged in helping us fundraise. Yeah.
Jewel, those were fantastic suggestions. Being flexible, being grounded in hope, really diving in, exploring social enterprise, creating the infrastructure within your organization and the team, staying close to your board. Quick question for you around a fundraising tactic that I get a lot of questions about. We know that connecting regularly with your long-term supporters and building a strong base of your monthly recurring donors, is wonderful in helping to patch up the leaky bucket, right, of donors. What storytelling or messaging did you use to communicate after your funding loss that you had? Were you transparent in saying, hey, we've lost some funding, can you help us make up for the difference? Or how did you go about that?
Great question. Specifically, that's where we really have been engaging with Instagram and with our social media. And now we have a quarterly newsletter that, where we're really being transparent and sharing what's happening, but also sharing the funding that we currently have, how it's continuing to sustain us. I think it is important to be honest. I mean, it's important to be honest. But that's how we're specifically engaging right now, is specifically social media. It seems to be the easiest way in the sense of, giving people, it's quick, it's there. And then also being able to, through the newsletter, sharing like this is, that's where the continued story about this is where we are now, this is where we're going, this is where we may need help, etc.
All right, so you are totally meeting the moment by using social media and trying to give quick insights and impacts as things are happening. I love it. Piper, we're going to move over to you to I Live Here, I Give Here. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Piper Steggy Nelson, and I'm the executive director of I Live Here, I Give Here. We are a nonprofit here in Central Texas. We've been here since 2007, and our goal has been to get more people to give back to our community. Austin is a really wonderful city, and there are lots of resources here. And so it's been our challenge to figure out how you get those resources really given back to the community and get people more excited about giving back to the community. So we're working to build a culture of philanthropy across Central Texas. One of the ways that we do that is by holding an enormous Central Texas Giving Day called Amplify Austin Day, which we've been doing for the last 14 years. And every year we raise about $10 million on that day for about 755 local nonprofits here in Central Texas. Do would you like me to talk about how we're meeting the moment now, or would you like me to wait for that?
Yes, let's do that. Please
So
dive into it.
I think one of the things that we are seeing is because we work with so many nonprofits, and because I come from a background of both nonprofits and federal and state government. So I've always been sort of in the public service space. So when we're talking with these 755 nonprofits, or when we're out in the community, or when I'm just talking to friends who also work in nonprofits, I think one of the things that we see is that people are pretty scared. I would argue that right now, and I'm sure that other industries feel the way, but that nonprofits are sort of the canary in the coal mine right now. We're the ones that have always had the most precarious funding. We're the ones that have always been sort of doing the on the ground work with the communities, and we're the ones who are really getting hardest hit right now. And it is frankly a scary time. And so here at I Live Here, I Give Here, first of all, one of the things that we're doing is just making sure that all the nonprofits here in Central Texas know that they are loved and supported. We're providing training on fundraising and communications. But as an organization that is also trying to figure out how we maintain our sustainability, over the last year, we did a program evaluation and we cut a couple of programs. We've really shored up the way that we are doing our work to make sure that we are focusing our time and our resources on the most impactful things that we do. For us, and I would argue for lots of nonprofits, this is not necessarily a time for innovation. This is a time to figure out what the community relies on from you and how you can continue to provide those services to the people, the nonprofits, the communities that really, really need you. So one of the ways that we're doing that is through even more collaboration and partnerships. I love that you talked about that, because that's always the way that we like to work, but even more right now. This is not the time for us to put our head down and say, nope, we're just going to take care of ourselves. This is a time for us to come together and say, okay, you've lost funding here. How can we talk about that? Okay, you are struggling with your finances, your finance team. How can we fill in that gap? It's a time to come together and form even more collaboration and partnership. One of the things that we've done is we've created actually a group of women EDs and CEOs of nonprofits that we gather once every other month to have a conversation about how they're doing and what's going on and what are some of their biggest concerns right now. The other form of collaboration that I'm loving right now in Central Texas is that there's more and more conversation about what people are seeing and feeling around federal funding cuts. In fact, we've got a group that's led by our SVP Austin and United Way that's working on a survey to get more information from nonprofits about what's happening, what they're seeing, and what they're feeling. That information we can then share with the community to really say, here's the facts. But that information could not be gathered without that type of collaboration and partnership. So I love that, and I encourage other communities to figure out gathering that information as well. I also want to say that doing a risk assessment is really important. And there are lots of great organizations here in Central Texas that are talking about that already. The New Philanthropists gave a great training on how to do a risk assessment. At my next board meeting, one of the things that I'm doing with my board is talking about the various types of risks that we are facing. What's on our website? What is our funding streams? What programs are we doing? What are the different types of risks that we are facing? What is their comfortability with risk? And how do we address the fact that all of those areas are going to be facing even more risk over the next couple of years? So doing that risk assessment is really important. And I would argue that that's a great place for funders to come in, by the way, is to help make sure that these organizations are doing risk assessments. And the last thing I'll say is, and you all mentioned this as well, Kimberly, but that donor stewardship is key. I cannot tell you how often we talk to donors, funders, corporations that have no sense of how scary it is right now, have no understanding of sort of what it feels like to be in the nonprofit sector right now. And so it's not just about stewardship, about saying thank you and look what you did. And oh my goodness, we're so grateful for you. It's also doing the education, we've seen these 5 nonprofit organizations close their doors. These 2 nonprofits are facing extinction. Like, to make sure that that education is flowing out is also really important in terms of how we're talking to donors right now. Thank you for this opportunity. God, this is all stuff I'm really passionate about. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Thank you. Well, and you're talking about what you were seeing feet on the ground, which is exactly why we wanted to pull this together. I mean, Bonterra is also in a very unique position with just the size of organizations that we serve and the fact that we deliver technology end to end, right? From where the donor is making the contribution all the way to the service delivery. So we have this, advantage of a bird's eye view, but also our clients being feet on the ground, right? And our coaches and consultants being feet on the ground. And so we wanted to elevate this conversation because folks can feel very isolated right now as things are happening and just fearful. And so hearing this from you and Jewel so far, Celia, we're coming to you next, don't worry, is helpful. One of the things that I want to dive into, I have 2 questions for you, real fast. First of all, something that I always get asked around major gifts. So you're working with 750 organizations. You have a massive giving day, and a wonderful response. Some organizations are going, well, if we could just get some more major donors, we'll be okay. How do you answer that?
I mean, don't we all always want more major donors? I think for us, um, I will be 100% honest. I want more major donors, but I want more major donors giving to everything right now. I want more major donors who say, this is a moment where I am going to step up and give more of my DAF. I'm going to spend more of my endowment. I am going to. So I think we all want major donors in every way. And I would argue that this is really the time for those people to step up.
Agree. Okay, and then I want to dive into your statement where you said now is not the time for innovation. There was somebody in the chat who was like, "Love this, thank you." Now, in my side of the world, where I live in the world of leveraging tech for growth and scale and efficiency, I'm sitting here going, okay, I need to hear more about how you advise organizations, big and small, around their use of tech and being innovative when times are tough.
I'll be honest, I think that giving days like Amplify Austin Day that are using technology are actually, this is the moment for them. I think that it's an incredible way to galvanize community resources. You know, our Amplify Austin Day is, which brings in 30,000 people a year giving, and about 70% of people are new. 70% of those people are new every year. So that technology from Bonterra is something that we rely on really, really heavily. And I think that makes a huge impact in our community. When I'm talking about innovation, what I'm talking about is this is a really hard time to think about opening a new building, starting a new program, doing some sort of new enterprise. I was so impressed that Joel was talking about how they were doing things in a new way. That's so impressive. And for me, that's not where we are. Right now, we are in okay, bottom line, what are the things we have to do? Who are the people we have to serve? And how do we make sure that we can continue doing that? So it's not really a technology innovation thing. I think to your point, have I started using ChatGPT a little bit more? I have. I don't like to admit that, but I have. But I think that what I'm talking about is more of that organizational innovation piece.
Yeah, and I think that really drives it home where it's you suggested doing an audit first, right? Really diving into what is working, who is supporting, and then that's where you can become even more innovative because you have the data behind it.
And
Celia,
and
we're
you're
gonna
not and you're not so widespread too, right? Like you focused it. Sorry, I'm done. Thank
yes,
you.
1000%. Celia, please share with us more about what Feeding Texas is doing and seeing as you meet the moment.
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me. I've learned so much from my co-panelists, so thank you. And I've kind of gotten lost in the chat, just hearing where everybody is from. And I wish we had time to hear from all of you as well, because I'm sure we'd learn as much as we can teach. So I'm Celia Cole. I have been in the anti-hunger space my whole career, almost 30 years, most of it in Texas. So I've lived through welfare reform and the Great Recession and the pandemic, and because I'm from Texas, multiple major disasters. So I remind myself of that every time I think about how bad things are now, that things have been bad before, and nonprofits are, I think, naturally resilient and good at pivoting, and we will make it through this moment as well. So, a little bit about who Feeding Texas is. Our mission is to lead a unified effort for hunger-free Texas, and we do that together with a network of 20 member food banks and over 4,000 local partners that they serve. And together we reach about 4 million Texans annually. So Feeding Texas is the state association that supports all those food banks. And food banks do a lot more than food. They offer lots of wraparound services such as nutrition education and health interventions, workforce training. And we've also become more and more involved in how we can sort of support local food systems. Feeding Texas, in turn, we support our members in a number of different ways, primarily through advocating for resources at the state and federal level that both come directly to food banks, but also to the people we serve, who we call our neighbors. And then we do a lot of work to really align our food banks around common goals to ensure that we are getting resources to our communities in an efficient and equitable way. And we play a big role in bringing in resources to sort of support our food banks and meeting those community needs. And at the same time, looking at sort of what are the solutions to tackle root causes of hunger. So it's not just about meeting immediate needs, but we know people don't just wake up one morning and there's no food in the fridge and they're scratching their heads why. We know food is a money problem. Hunger is a money problem more than it is a food problem. In terms of how we've been impacted recently, most of the budget that comes to Feeding Texas is passed through to our food banks. So the cuts at the federal level have deeply impacted the services that they provide. But those grants have also provided important operational support for my team. So we've been impacted as well as the food banks. Food banks are really very reliant on federal funding, both for food and for some of the programming they provide. About 1/3 comes from USDA commodities. So in the past year, we've lost a lot of the funding, a lot of the food coming from the federal government, as well as a lot of the funding that's helped us procure local food, which really supports our local food systems work. In addition, we've lost critical funding for nutrition education. And that in turn is not just affecting food banks operations and leading to personnel cuts and impacting neighbors facing hunger. It's also impacting those 4,000 or so small community-based organizations that they provide food to. So, when I think about how we've met the moment, I think sort of from the big picture, it's you have to stay focused on your mission, but be really bold in thinking about reimagining how you deliver it. And maybe that's a kind of innovation. So for us, that means planning for the near term, but sort of continuing to have a vision for what the long term looks like, and making sure that everything that we do now is still in service to that longer vision. And then finally, I think staying aligned to our values, regardless of necessary pivot. So for us, that means always remaining neighbor-centered or people-centered, and thinking about what they most need and how we are best positioned to sort of deliver on it. In terms of specific things, I'll probably, of how we've sort of gone about adapting, I think I'll probably be repeating some of the things that have been said already, but definitely engaging our board deeply has been really important for our network, because we're supporting 20 distinct nonprofits, and staying aligned and pivoting together, we know will make us stronger in the long run than sort of dividing and conquering or fragmenting. We've looked at diversifying revenue streams through more grassroots campaigns, corporate partnerships, and even looking at like what I'll call like a fee for service model. In our case, because nutrition and health are so interdependent, we're looking at how we can integrate food into the healthcare delivery system to create a new revenue stream. Another area is recognizing that we don't need to do it all, that we need to collaborate more with peer organizations to both share resources, figure out who does what best, and in turn be amplifying, our impact. And then I think communication with all of our stakeholders, funders and others, about the real world impact of funding cuts has been really important. And then, I think it's really about sort of figuring out how you build that long-term resilience while meeting immediate needs. And for us, that is through strengthening our relationships, increasing trust in our communities and among other stakeholders, and then through strategic planning. So we've launched a statewide needs assessment in partnership with some local foundations to gather real-time data from food banks and community stakeholders so that we can tell the story to funders. We have created a multi-tier funding proposal to offer donors a structured menu of giving options so they can choose from various levels of support aligned to specific program needs and impacted areas. We've done a lot of scenario planning when there was sort of uncertainty around budget cuts, but even before they became a reality, and really have engaged our board and other stakeholders, staff, neighbors that we serve heavily to determine like where do we need to be focusing in the immediate coming year. And then I think the last thing I'll say about sort of how we are responding is, and this, but even before the pandemic, we did some restructuring in our organization to really align our advocacy with our fundraising. So the goal was to make our donors our advocates and our advocates our donors. But because we are so heavily invested in advancing sort of public policy and systems change that help people facing hunger, having an army of people getting ready to go out and talk to their elected officials about that is so important. So by aligning those two things, we both found donors that were a good fit for us and understood that what they were supporting was that advocacy. But in turn, that's, I think, also increased our influence with policymakers.
The amazing things that you are doing and seeing with all of the increased need that's coming and the network of organizations that you work with. And I love the advocacy side, because I think that that's what a lot of small organizations sometimes forget, is that as you're communicating with your supporters, right, be they donors or folks on your newsletter list or folks that you've just met, also looking at how you can leverage your voice to encourage them to act as well and equip them with knowledge on the larger sector. It doesn't have to be long and lengthy communications, right, Celia? It's just kind of tying, how your work kind of rolls up to the big picture of what we're seeing in the social space. And I've seen some things in the chat about this. So the question that I would ask is, how can an organization of any size really amplify that advocacy piece in a way that for some who don't have deep roots, right? They don't have a legal team, they don't have all of that. Like, how can they step into it? And maybe Piper, you know this as well. I can jump in. Where do they start? How do they start that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I think, as we think about what are the things we're good at and what are the things that we either aren't good at or don't have capacity for. I mean, I would urge smaller nonprofits that don't have capacity to do advocacy or staff to do it, to really think about aligning, working with those organizations that do. I know that we are always looking for more organizations to join our efforts in Texas to advocate for policy change, specifically with the state legislature. So we have a food policy roundtable, we call it, that has members from across lots of different sectors. So we have obviously lots of advocates and charitable food providers, but we also have healthcare organizations and people from the retail sector and the business sector and funders. And we are always looking to engage more people. And there's no criteria that you have to meet to do that. And we are, always available to provide not just resources about how to advocate for anti-hunger programs or that kind of thing, but really like how do you talk to lawmakers and how do you talk to the media? So, we're a larger and generally well-resourced nonprofit, and we want to share our power and share resources with our communities and with other nonprofits. So I think if you're small and looking to find ways to start, look for that assistance from a larger nonprofit. And then obviously social media is such a great tool for getting people riled up and giving people really specific actions that they can take. And that's the last thing I would say, is that if you're going to, increase awareness of a problem and a solution, you have to give people something super specific, concrete to immediately sink their teeth into, and then find ways to get people to come back. I think we talk a lot about engaging people with lived experience of hunger and poverty and to become advocates. But that can't just be a one-way street where they come to the Capitol to testify on a bill and then that's the end of it. There has to be an ongoing way for them to stay engaged and feel empowered. So I think it needs to be genuine sort of community engagement when you are looking to get community members to speak up.
That's awesome. Thanks. All right. So let's move into a question or two. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure we're maximizing everyone's time. Our first question is, and this is for the full panel, if you could ask funders to make one change in how they support nonprofits right now, what would it be and why? And Piper, can we start with you first?
Yes.
See you nodding.
I honestly think that you mentioned it, but that unrestricted funding is sort of key. Going to the trust-based philanthropy, multi-year, easier grant applications, some more simple grant applications, unrestricted funds. That means a lot to nonprofits right now. So I would say that that's my number one ask.
Others? Celia, Jewel?
Yeah, I mean, we're probably all going to say the same thing.
Unrestricted funds, unrestricted
funds.
Trust-based philanthropy. Okay.
Well,
So
this question came up earlier about, is it time to innovate? And I think like staying relevant and resilient in this time is going to require us, so that we can innovate in the future, it's going to require us to maintain our operations, to retain our experience and our expertise so that we can meet those future moments, and we can, be resilient to meet the future moments, but also retain the capacity to innovate. So when funders recognize that and they invest in organizational capacity and not just programs or direct services, that builds long-term resilience and it empowers nonprofits to innovate and lead.
Yeah, I love what everyone has already said. And yes, unrestricted funding. And being, and not saying that means that we don't have accountability. Of course, accountability is still there in whatever way that it needs to be given to the funder, but really trusting that the orgs and spending the time to get to know the organization so that you can trust them to give the unrestricted funding. And there's so many ways. I mean, we all have our reports, we all have our ways to prove all of the work that we do. I mean, that's what we have to do in nonprofit. But I think for funders to also look at, of course, they have their mission of how they want to impact the community, but what about partnering together to come up with how the impact meets both needs?
Great points. So collaboration. We're hearing collaboration, and so that's so important. I'm going to pop into some of the Q&A that I'm seeing here, and I'm seeing some themes. So I'm going to sort of merge some of the questions together, if I may. One of the things that I saw in chat and kind of feeds with this is the idea around, supporting locally, and then also the fear of competition within your community. And I've heard that also, as we've looked at rural fundraising, right? Like some of the challenges that more urban fundraising versus rural fundraising can face is, there are fewer organizations and sometimes fewer funders in rural areas. There are challenges with sponsorships of organizations that or companies that are affected by the economic changes. So, as with all of you and the networks that you have, what advice would you give viewers on how they should be building partnerships, managing what they may be seeing as tighter dollars in their communities and the competition that exists? Piper, can we start with you on that one? Do you
Yes.
mind? Because
Yes,
you've got such a big network. And
let's see how it goes. Let's see how it goes. I sort of have this, but when we do an event right now, we never do the event by ourselves, right? Like we know that in order for an event to be successful, we have to work with multiple other organizations so that we get the right people at the table, we get the right funding, we get all those sorts of things. I would argue that there are lots of opportunities for nonprofits to work together even more strategically. Here in the local area, we have an organization called Austin Together that really helps organizations think about how they can work together, either informally on a project or more formally in terms of mergers. I also think this is a lovely opportunity for funders and nonprofits to work together more. As we've been talking about all of this unrestricted funding, I think this is such a great time for funders to say, what do you need? And nonprofits to be honest and open about what they need. So I think collaboration on all front is imperative right now. Which is a form of innovation, by the way. Collaboration is a form of innovation.
Yes.
Jewel, we're going to pop over to you.
Excellent. Yeah, cheers to that, Piper. Yes. I would say, thinking of the competitors more, what we do, and I understand that we're in Los Angeles, that is a much more well-resourced state, but we look at our competitors really as sister organizations. How can we connect with other organizations who are similar to us, and how can we one, build a coalition together, and two, as Piper mentioned, are there projects that we can work together with? For example, there is another organization called Las Fotos, and they are really focused on the actual still photo while we are focused on the film and television motion pictures. There might be a grant where the two of us can work together. And even though we may be somewhat competitive in the grants that we would be going after, but maybe we can come together and work together. And actually now we are even now working with a former executive director from Las Fotos on future funding. So you never know where it's going to come from, and you never know how building the partnership now, but really think about, instead of competitors, think of them as sister brother organizations.
Love that. Love that. I'm looking at the time. I know we don't have much time left. Celia, I want to pop this question over to you first and maybe have others jump in. So let's talk about the mental health of your teams. Not only is this a very stressful time in the way in which, the world is evolving, the way in which funding and, within organizations is occurring, but also around this stress of higher need, more services, right, that need to be delivered. What advice or inspiration can you give to our viewers today as we all continue to move and meet through this moment, right? What would you say about just organizations really diving into the mental health of their staff?
Yeah, it's so critically important. And I know we got a trial run at this during the pandemic where everyone was just feeling overwhelmed. But now you add to it that people are worried about losing their jobs. But back during the pandemic, I started offering wellness days to the team, and we have, I think, fairly generous PTO. And the thing that surprised me so much was how much people loved the wellness days, even though they weren't taking their PTO. I was like, why should I be telling you the day that you need to be well? But I think it was this idea of we're all going to take a breath and pause and step back from work together. So it's not this sense of like, if I'm gone, I'm not doing my job if everyone else is there. So I've kept those, and they're really, I think, people actually use them, and I think they're really appreciated. And I think staff appreciate being seen and heard. And then we have a culture of transparency. We share probably a lot more with our staff than some organizations do. We've made that sort of an explicit value. And so we really encourage people to sort of talk and share and their feelings, and when they're not feeling, good about things, and create space for that, so that people don't have to sort of shove their mental health aside while they're at work, but they can feel like they're in a space where they're seen and heard and can be their true selves, and don't cut benefits.
I would just add that because of, and Jewel, I'm so sorry. Do you want to say something? Okay, I cut you off earlier and I felt bad. Sorry. When we are looking at what we do, which is getting people to give back, we try and live that mission. So once a quarter, my amazing nonprofit manager, she organizes a volunteer day for us. So we volunteer for 2 hours in the morning with a local nonprofit, and then we have a team lunch. And doing that once a quarter feeds our mental health, and also make sure that we're living the mission of our organization. So I'm real proud of that. I love that she does that for us.
And if I could just add, I think the most important thing too is, and I love what everyone has shared, is just remembering, we can't be serving our community and then not serving our staff. We can't, I have seen that, and we have to remember the empathy, the love, the care. It has to be for our staff the same way we are for our community. If our staff are seeing that we're taking better care of the community than our staff, then we're not in alignment. We're off. And so I think it's really important for leaders themselves to take a pause and make sure that, one, they are taking care of themselves mentally and not projecting that onto their teams as well.
Awesome. I know that takes us to the top of the hour. I'm sure we could probably spend another hour together here. It feels like, with all of the questions and excellent conversations that have come through, and just I know, Celia, you were saying you were distracted in the chat with just like the conversations that were happening and people learning from one another. And there's so much like good insight here. But I wanted to just share that if you want to dive in deeper, we have the full report that you can download here, that everyone here contributed to. We also have a fundraising assessment that you can take. You can explore different solutions. Let us know if that is something you're interested in. We are always happy to chat with you. But that I will be really quick in that spiel because I wanted to make sure that I emphasize just my gratitude for Celia, Piper, Jewel, Kimberly, for y'all joining us and sharing the ways that you've adapted, either held steady, changed, right? Made those tough decisions, focused on joy, focused on that piece of hope. And so I really appreciate you sharing and being a part of this really important conversation today for nonprofits who need to feel kind of seen and heard and like they're not alone, for funders who need to understand how they can be a better partner and better supporter of organizations who are kind of faced with this moment in time, and just giving us that little piece of, we can do this, right? We're going to get through, and really providing some actionable tips along the way, because I know that sometimes we're like, we can do it. It's like, but how? So I think that y'all really provided a really clear version of the how. And I hope you see the the thank yous rolling through the chat, as this was super, super valuable, and just want to appreciate you all for a moment over time here. If anyone has any final words, I will not be the last voice if we don't want it to. But I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say quickly, thank you for this invitation, Amanda. Thank you, Kimberly. And so amazing to be with these panelists, Piper and Celia. I'm just so inspired by everything that you're doing. So yeah, this has been wonderful.
Ditto,
Full
Jill.
gratitude.
Ditto.
What a sector we have, right? Amazing. And the chats were just so inspiring as well. Y'all, we can do this. We can do it.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day, your week, your month. We look forward to seeing you on future sessions and future conversations like this one. Take care, folks.
Thank you.